Well, friends, welcome to Q on Q. We have arrived at episode 100. And before I say anything else, I want to pause right here for a moment. Not to celebrate a number, though reaching 100 episodes is a pretty big accomplishment, and not to rush past it either, just to acknowledge it. I want to stop for a minute and just acknowledge 100 episodes represents a journey that didn't always feel clear or easy, but one that continued on anyway. If you've been listening for a long time, thank you. Thank you for being here. And if this is your first episode, I'm really glad you found your way in today. This space has always been about asking thoughtful questions and sitting with honest answers and creating room for faith and real life to exist together. But hear me when I say this. Episode 100 isn't a victory lap, and it's certainly not the end. It's a checkpoint. It's a moment to look around, to take stock of all that we've done and where we are, and decide how we move forward. And now that we are a few weeks into 2026, if you've listened in the past, you know that I'm not one that really sets New Year's resolutions, but instead I choose a word for the year. A word that literally becomes my focus for everything. It guides my thinking, my actions, and any changes that I seek to make. And I literally plant that word everywhere. I put it on my desk at school, and I put it inside my phone and my notes, and I put it in places that I will look on a regular basis. And for 2026, I've been thinking and praying a long time about what this word for 2026 would be. And I bounced around on a few, but one kept coming back over and over again. And if you haven't already guessed it from the title of this podcast, that word is renewal. Not reinvention, not starting over, renewal. The kind that restores what's been worn down, refreshes what's grown tired, and realigns what may have slowly drifted. Renewal is not dramatic. It's not like you turn the clock to January 1st and suddenly you are 40 pounds lighter. It's necessary. It's something many of us, I think, are really quietly craving, but are really afraid to admit it. Because if we're honest, staying faithful in something takes a lot, and it takes a toll. Showing up consistently in our work, in our relationships, in our faith, can slowly wear us down in ways we don't always notice until we're tired. We're not burned out, maybe. We're not broken, just worn. And worn things don't need to be replaced, they need to be renewed. Writing and producing a podcast isn't easy, and I'd be lying if I said there weren't times I thought about ending Q on Q. Because to be honest, we go from weeks with hundreds of listeners to weeks with just a few. Sometimes we cover the entire globe with people who are tuning in, and sometimes it's just the folks down the street. Sometimes it's frustrating. All the time. All the preparation. Sometimes I wonder, is it worth continuing? Should I or shouldn't I? But then I reflect on the very thing that I just talked about. I think we all come to a point where we need some renewal, a refreshing, a new look, a fresh look at what we do and how we do it. So as we celebrate 100 episodes, know that today isn't about wrapping things up or putting a bow on the past. It's about naming where we've been, acknowledging what this journey has required, and opening ourselves to what God wants to restore in us next. Episode 100 is not an ending, it's an invitation. And it's where this next journey of Q on Q begins. When I think back of the journey of this podcast, what stands out to me the most isn't any single episode or series, though I have had a few. It's the idea of returning week after week, season after season. And there has been a steady decision to show up and keep this conversation going. Some of the episodes have been born out of clarity and confidence, and others came together in the middle of questions or times of uncertainty or transition. But all of them were part of the same commitment to stay present and honest and open in the process. This space has grown alongside real life. The themes we've explored faith, identity, purpose, waiting, growth, seasons of life they weren't chosen at random. They reflected moments that I was walking through myself, sometimes in real time. There were seasons where recording felt natural and energizing, and others where it required discipline and trust. And over time, the podcast became less about delivering answers and more about naming the right questions. What I think I've learned along the way is that growth doesn't always announce itself. It often happens quietly, in the background, while we're focused on simply being faithful. There were moments when it felt like nothing was changing, and yet looking back, it's clear that something was always being shaped. My perspective deepened, the language and the tone and the conversation matured and became less about fixing life and more about understanding it. This journey has revealed how much consistency matters. Not the flashy kind, but the steady kind. The kind that keeps going when momentum fades or when life feels crowded. I think consistency has a way of forming us, even when we don't realize that it's happening. It really teaches us patience and humility and trust in the long term rather than immediate outcomes. Just the same, we've also experienced seasons of adjustment, moments where we shifted tone, focus, or pace, or where I might have needed some time off to allow for the happenings of life, or moreover, to allow topics to come into focus. And those shifts weren't signs of instability, they were signs of attentiveness. They reflected on a willingness to listen, to adapt, and to respond honestly to what was happening beneath the surface. Growth rarely follows a straight line, and this journey has been no exception. Looking back now, I see that this podcast has been as much a companion as it has been a platform. It has held a space for reflection, for conversation, for prayer, not just for listeners, but for me too. And while episode 100 invites us to reflect, it also reminds us the story isn't defined by what's already been recorded. It's shaped just as much by the faithfulness that continues beyond this moment. So why keep going? Why look to episode 200 and beyond? Well, staying sounds simple until you actually try to do it. Staying means remaining committed when novelty wears off and the excitement of beginning gives way to the weight of continuation. It's choosing not to drift when it would be easier to step back, soften expectations, or quietly walk away. Over time, staying reveals its cost, not always in dramatic ways, but in the steady accumulation of effort, attention, and resolve. There's seasons out there when staying requires sacrifice that no one else sees. Might mean carrying responsibility while feeling unseen or misunderstood or even questioned. It can mean showing up with integrity when the internal reward feels thin. Friends, the cost isn't always exhaustion. Sometimes it's discouragement or the quiet temptation to believe faithfulness no longer matters because progress feels slow or invisible. Growth often stretches us into spaces where old patterns no longer fit, but new ones haven't fully formed. That in between space can feel awkward and uncertain. It's where confidence wavers, where comparison creeps in, and where doubt whispers that maybe we've outgrown what once felt meaningful, or worse, that what we're doing no longer has purpose. And yet, there's something profoundly formative about staying in those moments. Not because staying is heroic, but because it's honest. It acknowledges that life isn't made up of constant breakthroughs. Much of it is lived in ordinary faithfulness, choosing to continue when there's no clear payoff, no applause, and no immediate clarity. What I've learned is that staying doesn't mean refusing change. It means resisting the urge to abandon our work too soon. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't times in life where we're going to be moving through seasons where there are some things we're going to have to let go. But in this case, it means giving growth the time it needs to take root. A lot of times, the very tension we want to escape is the thing shaping us for what's next. Resilience, we're learning discernment, and depth that could never be rushed. It reminds us that endurance is not about stubbornness, it's about trust. Trust that what is being formed beneath the surface matters, even when we can't yet see the outcome. And while staying may come with a cost, it also prepares us quietly and steadily for renewal that hasn't revealed itself yet. More often than not, renewal rarely arrives by accident. It often comes after something that has been cleared or loosened or laid down. There's an active element to renewal that we sometimes overlook. Not striving for something new, but creating space for it to arrive. We just talked about this in our seasons series. You know, what autumn represents. That space can feel unsettling, especially for those of us who are used to measuring life by productivity or progress or visible outcomes. One of the hardest truths about renewal is it often begins with subtraction. Not everything that once fit belongs in the next season. Habits, expectations, even identities can quietly outlive their usefulness. Letting go doesn't mean those things were wrong, it simply means they've done their work. Renewal asks us to release what has become heavy, rigid, or automatic so that something living and vibrant can take its place. Also, kind of an internal clutter that we sometimes experience that blocks our ability to renew. Unprocessed disappointment or old narratives about failure or assuming how things have to be, that can take more room up than we realize. When we carry those things unchecked, they don't just weigh us down, they shape our decisions quietly, and they alter our tone and the way we show up in the world. What often happens in those quiet moments is us making space. When we stop filling every gap with noise, every moment with effort, every action with explanation, when we allow stillness instead of rushing to the next thing, something begins to surface. Not answers necessarily, but awareness, a sense of what no longer fits, a nudge towards something truer, a reminder that we are not meant to carry everything alone. And that kind of waiting requires patience. Renewal rarely operates on our preferred timeline. As humans, we want clarity quickly. We want the directions to be clearly marked. But meaningful renewal tends to unfold slowly, often beneath the surface. And what feels like nothing happening might actually be deep work taking place. And that requires attentiveness. You might not see it, but you might be waiting for it. And when we slow down enough to notice what is restoring us, what's bringing us clarity or peace or renewed curiosity, we begin to recognize how renewal has been quietly reaching for us all along. Sometimes it arrives through rest, sometimes through honest conversation or creativity, or simply through the courage to sit with what we've been avoiding. And one of the hardest things, maybe, when it comes to renewal is to realize that it doesn't demand that we reinvent everything at once. Again, that January 1st analogy I used earlier. Suddenly you hit New Year's Day and suddenly you act differently and you eat differently and you do this and you don't do this. And I understand there are decisions that can be made and things that we change, but you know, doing everything at once, renewal asks us to be willing, just willing to notice, willing to release, willing to wait without immediately filling that space with something else. That willingness becomes a doorway, not to instant transformation, but to a steadier kind of newness that grows over time. Doesn't change what we carry, it changes how we move. After space has been made, there's a subtle shift in our posture. Decisions begin to be approached with more care. Our reactions slow down. There's an awareness within our growth that not every opportunity deserves a yes, and not every urgency is actually important. Renewal teaches us to walk with intention instead of momentum. And I think that gives us a new relationship with trust. Not the kind that demands certainty, but the kind that allows for forward movement without needing every outcome guaranteed. It invites us to take steps even when the path isn't visible, to move with confidence that isn't rooted in control, but in faith that guidance will meet us as we go. Walking this way often requires us to literally unlearn walking another way, because old patterns of overfunctioning and self protection or fear driven decision making don't disappear overnight. Renewal doesn't shame those habits, it gently loosens their grip. And over time, we begin to respond from a place of groundedness rather than reflex, choosing presence over performance. There's something sacred about that shift. When life is no longer driven solely by pressure or expectation, we become more attuned to timing, when to act, when to wait, when to let something unfold. It's something that can't be forced, only followed. Walking differently doesn't mean walking perfectly. There will be missteps, hesitations, and moments of doubt or questioning, but renewal gives us the grace to keep moving without that harsh self judgment. It reminds us growth is not about getting it right every time. It's about staying responsive, staying open, being willing to be led into what's next. Seeing that horizon is one of the clearest signs that renewal's in motion. As space has been made and posture starts to shift, we start noticing possibilities that were invisible before. Not because they suddenly appeared, but because our perception has changed. The horizon stretches differently when we're lighter, more attentive, and more intentional. It's a perspective grounded in presence rather than in rushing towards some idealized future. Renewal in motion teaches us patience, especially with timing. You've heard me talk about the waiting and being slow and leaving space. Well, opportunities rarely arrive exactly when we expect them, and clarity often comes in pieces. Yet when we walk with awareness, the small, deliberate steps we take align with those deeper parts of life. What feels slow or subtle may be the most meaningful work unfolding in us, shaping us quietly in ways we can't yet measure. There's a quiet courage in seeing that horizon. Renewal asks us to step forward without clinging to the comfortable or the guaranteed. Even as some things are left behind, we walk with the confidence that what is meant to meet us will. And subtle markers will appear. We'll see restored focus, renewed curiosity, or small habits that feel lighter. Those signal that change is happening, even when the full picture remains unclear. These signs will reassure us the work of renewal is real, ongoing, and quietly transformative. Every focused step, every thoughtful choice, every pause to notice what truly matters is part of what transforms our ordinary life into something alive, something steady, something full of potential. As you reflect on all that we've talked about today, I want you to take some time to think about one area of your life that could use renewal. I want you to ask yourself some questions. Things like, where do I feel drained or stretched thin? What habits, what expectations or thought patterns don't fit where I feel like God is leading me? Where could I create a little more space to breathe and notice what matters most? You don't need to answer those all at once. Just start by noticing. Awareness is the first step towards meaningful change. You might consider writing your thoughts down or even journaling small observations over several days. What's most important is to notice. Notice where your energy flows naturally and where it feels restricted. Sometimes renewal begins not with action, but with clarity, seeing what needs attention and being honest with yourself about what you're ready to let go of. The act of reflection alone is transformative. It creates room for intention and for life to shift in ways that are both practical and profound. So in 2026, I'm stepping into this year with Renewal as my guide. I've been thinking about what I want to carry forward and what I need to release and how I want to show up differently in my work, my relationships, and in the way I live my daily life. Some of it will be subtle. Some of it will make me feel uncomfortable. But I've learned that renewal isn't about perfection or speed. It's about attentiveness, willingness, and steady movement toward what is meaningful. And this episode, though it is a marker, is just the starting point of a new series that's going to explore renewal from several angles. We're going to be talking about renewal of the heart and renewing the mind and finding a renewed purpose. Each episode is going to build on the last, giving both practical guidance and a space to reflect on how God is quietly at work in our lives. And my hope is that you will find ways to notice and embrace renewal in your own life, to walk forward with open hands, with clarity, and trust. So as we close this milestone 100th episode of Q on Q, I invite you to consider the horizon in front of you. Renewal is already in motion, even if it's subtle. Small steps, quiet decisions, and honest reflection will carry you into this next season. And together, let's explore how to walk through it with awareness and faith. Well, that's all for this 100th episode of Q on Q. As always, I really do appreciate you tuning in this week. We'll see you back here next time when we'll have more for you on Q.